I've actually been debating on posting this video for a while now, but since YouTube has its fair use hooks lodged deep into my skin, I figured now would be as good a time as any. So I said way in the beginning of the year, and honestly it's about time I got to it, that I would slowly be turning my channel towards more analytical content rather than reactionary content. This is that. There will still be reactions, of course, but you guys have let me know repeatedly that you would like me to do more in-depth analysis, not just stuff that I see on the surface, but as I look further into things. And as I continue to slog away at my novel, it's a lot, guys. It's a lot. That I would start really talking more and more about the process of writing and writing as a craft. I have been a semi-professional for a really long time, but a lot of the stuff that I do write, no one sees. Most of my writing is hobby writing. I would say about 60% fan fiction, 40% just observational stream of consciousness stuff, and about 10% poetry because I am my father's daughter. The fact of the matter is that you guys have expressed a deep interest in not only D&D, but just writing as a whole and the art of world building. But before we get to the macro, let's sort of focus in, shall we? Because we don't have a story without characters. For those of you who know, and for those of you who don't, my name is TK, your resident lunatic, and one of these days I'm gonna pick up the voice actor moniker again once I get my extensive dental work done. It's a long story. I don't want to go into it. I have noticed that since the writer's strike has really kicked into high gear, that there has been a lot of discussion on what it takes to write something. Now, there are a lot of people who will say, well, AI shows are gonna be the next big thing, which I don't necessarily think is true because AI doesn't write, it creates content, and content is meant to be consumed, not interpreted or hell, even enjoyed. I'm personally on the side of keep human writers because I believe that writing is an art and you should always have humans do art regardless of the medium they use. I really don't think that AI has a place in the discussion of art. I think a lot of it comes from people finally feeling the joy of being creative without having to try, and this has caused a lot of hullabaloo on Twitter, which sucks, but you know, 2 weeks ago, I saw a tweet saying, well, I'm tired of characters going through the darkest, most traumatic shit and never addressing it, which sounds good, right? There are a lot of shows that just kind of sweep character arcs under the rug, and this could be for a number of reasons, like multiple writers, not enough money, the actor refuses to do something, or what have you. Usually it's to make room for the main characters to whine about their love triangle, and it hasn't escaped me that a lot of these characters get passed over are women, characters of color, what have you. That's a rant for another day, for whenever I feel like getting tons of hate from people with no critical thinking. However, since then, I have borne witness to two things, and that is millions of people watching Roman Roy's tailspin into self-destructive conservatism, and a stream of several hundred people watch the infamous train scene from Final Fantasy 15. Now, you can have all the opinions about Final Fantasy 15 or section you want, but that's not why we're here. And it vaguely occurred to me that audiences, or at least the ones that are very vocal on social media, aren't prepared for that. They don't like it when characters actually do address the trauma that they've been through. They do it in a way that they find uncomfortable or inconvenient. They do want some sort of catharsis for the trauma their favorite characters endure, but they usually only want one type of catharsis. And that is, you know, the tearful breakdown and confession and group hug, which is nice. When it comes right down to it, everyone deserves that at least once, just to be comforted. That's not really how life works. That's not how trauma manifests itself in people. And I understand that people read, watch, and play, etc. to escape reality, but you also have a God-given right to experience some variety. Conflict is necessary in a story. I don't care what the AI writers and people who only read fan fiction of their favorite kids shows say. Be it physical or emotional, there is no story without progress. And the only way to achieve progress is through conflict. And low stakes is fine. fine, but it's not for every story. Attitudes like this are why franchises like After and billionaire romance like 50 Shades of Grey are so popular. Because even though these genres are widely panned as bad, I've called them patience porn. Because the only real conflict is how long the main character has to wait for her paramour to become a better person. I've said this ad nauseum in Vox Machina and Yuri on Ice, but catharsis is not wholly good. Healing is messy, and some people don't. The absolutely masterful dinner scene in Hereditary and the ending of Midsommar come to mind specifically. Maybe that character feels better in the end, but it's not really worth it considering the people that are killed or tormented in the process, and it might feel vindicating for a moment, but you do kind of have to sit with the grim reality no matter how much better you feel afterwards, because in real life the only thing that heals you is time. Emotions are unpredictable and ugly. Some situations it's impossible to make the right decisions. Being an outside observer, as most viewers are, it's easy to say what that character should have done at that moment. It's always easy to look on the outside in and be like, they shouldn't have done that. That wasn't the right decision. And I mean, I'm guilty of it as a vocal hater of both branches of the Black Eagles route in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Sometimes characters you like are mean. Sometimes characters you hate have emotions that make it easy to relate to them, no matter how much you don't want to. Hell, you might even start seeing their side of the story, despite the fact that you really don't want to. I don't like Edelgard and Rhea. Have I made that obvious enough? I see tons of social media posts saying that they want to see these new complex stories and complex characters, but when they get them, the discourse happens, which discourse isn't inherently bad, but if it happens on Twitter, it is. I hope that helps. People arguing over who the real villain is, complaining that the right decision wasn't made at the right time, or just dithering over time altogether. And I think that defeats the purpose of complex characters, because if you want your character to have layers, sometimes they have to be wrong, sometimes they have to make mistakes, sometimes they have to embarrass themselves. Intense emotions don't have a schedule. In fact, there is rarely a good guy and a bad guy in a tense argument. Since let's take the train scene from Final Fantasy 15. I see a lot of demands for complex, compassionate, and overall just better developed male characters out of JRPGs. And Final Fantasy 15, while contentious among the Final Fantasy fan base, it is still very much a JRPG. Despite the fact that the female characters are quite lacking, I really think there was a genuine, true effort put into making Gladio, Ignis, Prompto, and Noctis feel like real people, or at least a real group of friends. That is, until the train scene. I love this scene. I think it's great. It's intense, it's loud, it's inappropriate. They are having this intense argument in the middle of a train full of people, and sometimes that just happens in real life. It's never fun, it's never appropriate, very inconsiderate to the people around you, but it is quite realistic, especially when something horrible has happened. Friends fight. Oftentimes, they do make up. A single fight, even one as bad as this, doesn't have to destroy a friendship or a relationship. The general consensus is Gladio was the bad guy in the situation and should have just left Noctis alone after all that happened, or pulled him aside and tried to give him a stern talking to. It's easy to say he should have let Noctis mourn. He's just lost his father, fiance, and home, but with the exception of Iris surviving, so was Gladio. And Noctis almost never mentioned it. He mentions it once during the Titan battle, and that's pretty much it. Now, I could go into the fact that the only reason this scene is controversial is because Gladio is a threatening character, and therefore any kind of anger he shows would rub audiences the wrong way, and that if Prompto was the one to snap, no one would have batted an eye, but that's not the point of this video. Gladio's timing sucks, but he's always been able to light a fire under Noctis's ass with that kind of talk before. Because Noctis is typically kind of lazy and needs some tough love every now and again. It's said ad nauseum in Brotherhood and during the Titan fight, and Gladio usually lets Ignis do much of the coddling since he's the rock of the group. After sustaining life-changing injuries, Ignis is in desperate need of the support he's given everyone else, including Gladio, who now, instead of dividing most of the group's responsibilities with him, now has to shoulder them all himself, while Prompto takes care of Ignis and Noctis does nothing. Weeks have passed at this point, and grief and turmoil are at an all-time high. Neither of these things have a schedule, but they don't have the time to wait it out. Luna gave her life to Noctis for the ring, and he won't put it on, and he won't talk to Ignis, and Gladio says this:
Ignis took one for you too. And for what?
It's later revealed that Ignis went blind, putting on the ring for Noctis in his stead, literally taking one for the team. Even if he doesn't know how, Noctis hasn't said a fucking word about it. Gladio doesn't know how hard the ring is to put on because Noctis won't tell anyone. Not even Prompto, who at this point is a goddamn saint. Everything has gone wrong, and it's unfair to think everyone would make the right decision here, even Gladio. No matter how you slice it, Noctis is the leader, and he's not doing anything. His reason doesn't really matter. Yes, Gladio is perhaps even being cruel here, but he is right. There's no situation where pulling Noctis aside and having a little talk with him would have helped. He tries that in Cartanica. That pep talk doesn't hit until Ignis finally gets some breathing room to speak for himself. No one won this argument. Characters who react poorly in stressful situations often get a bad rep. Doubly bad if that character is a person of color, or a woman, or an otherwise non-Blorbo type character. You know the type I mean. That brings me to a specific scene in episode 3 of the series Arcane. Arcane was one of the first series I finished on this channel, and I still say that if you want to get into adult animation, that is the way to go. In the beginning of the show, it starts off with two parallel character arcs, that of Jace and that of Vi, and Powder to an extent. I have gone on record several times saying that I don't like Jace.
Fuck you!
He's my least favorite character. However, Vi is my favorite character, despite the fact that they're both very, very similar in the fact that they lack subtlety, they make decisions first and then regret later, and they're stubborn and often think that if they just keep trying, everything will be fine, oftentimes to their own detriment. However, the consequences of Jace's choices never really affect him directly beyond any sort of emotional distress, whereas Vi suffers constantly throughout the show. Now, she is responsible for a lot of things going wrong. Jinx becoming the way that she is not one of those things. In episode 3 of Arcane, Vi and Jinx, who went by Powder at the time, their father Vander gives himself up because they botched a robbery, which is a very simplified summary of what happened, but bear with me. This deal goes south. Vander gets kidnapped, his second and his friend on the inside of the police force get brutally murdered, leaving a power vacuum for the big bad Silco and his patsy Marcus to fill. Vi should have never tried to rescue Vander, but she's a 14-year-old girl who just watched two people get murdered. She's not exactly the picture of rationality. Not that she ever has been, but it's almost like that's a character flaw that characters are supposed to have. Everyone wants complex female characters until they actually get one. The rescue mission goes horribly wrong, as you might expect. Despite Vi's best efforts, and believe you me, she made an effort. As Jace makes groundbreaking discoveries in Piltover, so does Powder in Zaun. Using one of the cores she stole from him, she attempts to save her family by essentially blowing up the building, killing pretty much her entire family save for Vi, and not Silco because of Sevica's interference. After seeing her brothers crushed and impaled, their father dies in Vi's arms. Not 5 minutes later, Powder, who she told to stay home, reveals that she made the bomb, being entirely ignorant of what just happened. Vi's reaction is about how you'd expect. And so was Powder's. But I was surprised to see the amount of people who said, yeah, this is when I started to hate Vi, or Vi shouldn't have gotten mad, it was an accident. Being an accident doesn't magically make her family not murdered. Like it or not, this is a tragedy. Everyone dies in some way. Maybe if Vi had grown up to resent Powder or never intended to go back, because her intention was always to go back and apologize until she was chloroformed and dragged to actual prison. I could see why this show would hold her feet to the fire for a single moment of weakness. But her intention was always to do right by Powder, even though to the viewer it's pretty obvious that no matter what Violet did that day, Jinx and her mental state never stood a chance. When she does receive affection, it doesn't make her better. When faced with tragedy, people tend to lash out. It's not right or constructive, but they do. Some characters will even lie or purposefully miscommunicate. I will never forget the way Tumblr exploded when Pearl lied to Garnet so they could fuse more. It was a meltdown that could put Chernobyl to shame. That was my introduction to the show, by the way. That was the first time I had ever heard anything about it. Some characters will cry at the worst possible times. It's been almost 20 years, and no one has forgiven Momo Hinamori from Bleach for not immediately getting over her centuries-long hypnotism at the hands of Sosuke Aizen. Or forgiven Orihime for having a legit panic attack after watching Ichigo not only die, but come back wrong and then cut their other friend's arm off. And that was only after a heaping of abuse from her literal kidnappers. I get excited. I'm not saying that just because you can understand where a character's coming from means that you have to like them. And I honestly find the, hey, if you understand this character, then you're excusing their actions argument to be very reductive and disingenuous. Even characters you hate still have motives and still have sympathetic moments. This also applies to real life. There is one character I understand is a dark horse among the fandom, but I personally cannot stand them. And it takes a lot for me to outright hate a character. I don't even hate Jace. I hate Roman Roy from Succession.
Hey, motherfuckers.
Even as he wept over his father's casket, I felt nothing. But because of what happened in the penultimate episode, I do finally understand why he is the way he is. For starters, he is the youngest of an incredibly bombastic family. His father is like that, and his brother and sister are power-hungry maniacs. His half-brother is, delusional. Can you tell I don't like the Roy family? I don't like the Roy family. The family has an unspoken hierarchy, which the rules seem to change every 5 minutes, so not even Logan knows how it works. Not to mention, his family is so rich that they have no needs beyond the need for connection and want for power. The only motivations they have is the desire for more, which Roman is constantly and fruitlessly searching for. And his need for love and connection and want for power do not mix, as shown with his father, Jerry, and Mencken. Although I could hardly call what he and Mencken had even a friendship, no matter what the shippers say. The only way to call attention to himself in this insanity is essentially to be the loudest and oftentimes grossest in any situation.
Don't open Pandora's box. There's just more dicks in there.
And sometimes it works. Most of the time, it doesn't. Big shoes to fill. Big nervous breakdown. There are a lot of people crawling out of the woodwork to say, oh, I liked Roman up until season 4, episode 8. And now my question would be, why? We all saw the home run scene, but I digress. He meets all of the Blorbo criteria, so he will always have a fan base no matter what he does. There are a lot of excuses for him despite his many very inexcusable actions. Though one could concede that his siblings are worse, it doesn't matter. That's the point of the show, they all suck. I straight up did not understand why he ran into the protesters. I found myself asking, like, what the hell did he even expect? Did he just think so much of himself that he thought he'd just weave through the crowd and not get bowled over? This, like so many other gross things Roman says or does, gets him the validation he needs, and the only validation he knows is pain. Everything he does is designed to get him what he wants, and what he wants is to feel anything other than the deep, unyielding terror of being himself and acknowledging that self is perhaps unworthy of the love he craves so much. I get it now. I still don't care though. Even when, I would say especially when, it doesn't seem like it. These characters are complex, or at the very least have motives beyond the larger story, or that don't directly align with how the story wants to go. There's a difference between drama for drama's sake and legitimate conflict, like a player going, oh, it's what my character would do, and a legitimate character flaw causing conflict within the party. In character-driven stories, choices and coincidences matter, and for the story to be compelling, they cannot all be good. Your characters can't make the right decision every single time. They even might embarrass themselves or lie. Don't ask for a realistic story and then ask why the characters aren't doing or saying the right thing at the right moment. There is a reason these billionaire romances in these 50 Shades of Grey-esque stories, despite being bad, are so popular, because people want the feeling of realism, but not the actual consequences of it. I've broached this topic before, but I often see a lot of demands for YA and sitcoms to touch on more serious topics, like YA readers demanding sex scenes from their fantasies, other people demanding school shootings from Abbott Elementary. If you're needing something else from the media you consume, upgrade. If you're like me, the media you consume affects you greatly, and it's hard to find something that doesn't become your personality for at least a week. So I get that it can be really hard to find stories that don't trigger you or affect you negatively in some way, but instead of making demands of an entire genre, it'll behoove you to branch out a little bit. In this case, with the writer strike going on, go a little bit farther. Follow the writers of your favorite shows on social media and follow their recommendations, or better yet, support them directly. But before you do all of that, you need to make peace with the fact that characters you hate will do things you like, and characters you like will do things you hate. They'll also change your mind. Discourse isn't bad, unless it's on Twitter. Nevertheless, stories are meant to be discussed, and they can't be unless they're interesting. Otherwise, the windows would be blue for no reason. Please, please, please tell me your favorite controversial characters or controversial character moments in the comments below. Please like. If you like this video, please subscribe if you really like this video and would like to see more. If you really, really like me, you can support the channel on Patreon, where I post these videos the day before I put them on YouTube. If you would like to find me on social media, you can find me on Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok, and Twitter. Probably not TikTok anymore since I had to take it off my phone because I am very easily distracted, and mostly on Tumblr because fuck Twitter. And with that being said, stay weird, lovelies, and happy eating.